following interview is being conducted with Ms. Brenda Morales for the Latino Americans 500 Years of History Grant Project at Oklahoma State University. The interview will become part of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the Edmond Lowe Library on the Stillwater campus of Oklahoma State University. The interview is taking place on Thursday, June 2nd, 2016, in the Edmond Lowe Library in Stillwater, Oklahoma. The interviewer is Victor Domingos Baeza, Director of Library Graduate Services. Brenda, thank you for agreeing to participate in this oral history project. I want to remind you that this may be published as part of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University here in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and that you have granted us permission to publish the transcript and video in part or in its entirety. Okay, so if you could, for me, to start the interview, could you give me some sort of background information on yourself?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm Brenda Morales. I'm originally from South Texas and North Mexico. I grew up in both areas. It's called the Rio Grande Valley, so it's a border area. And the way I became acquainted with OSU is I did my undergrad in University of Texas Pan American, and well, at the time now I think it's called UTRGV, which is University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, and through my junior year, there was an internship opportunity that was offered here at OSU through NSF, through National Science Foundation. So I applied, got accepted, and came to OSU. That was my first acquaintance with OSU. Came for a summer to do research, and loved it. Only applied here for grad school, and I applied and came back. And then, so I finished my graduate school here and thought I was going back to Texas. I did for several months, and it called me back. OSU called me back. So, and now I'm here. I've been working here for about 8.5 years.
So where were you born?
Okay, so I was actually born in Pharr, Texas, but I've never lived there. It's part of the Rio Grande Valley area, and I was raised in Mexico. So it's kind of a particular situation. Like I said, I was born in the United States, but most of my education was in both sides of the border, but I lived mostly in Mexico. So until I was 15, then I came back to the United States.
Can you tell me a little bit about your family?
Yeah, so we are a medium-sized family. There's 4 children and my 2 parents. My parents are actually from, they're close by. They're Monterrey, Mexico, and General Terán, Mexico. They're both northern towns, and once they got married, they moved to Reynosa, which is where I grew up. And being there, that's where all of us were born. So, well, not in Reynosa. I don't think any of us were actually born there, which is interesting. But we were all born in the United States, with the exception of one brother who was born in Monterrey. But yeah, so we're a pretty close-knit family. Like I said, we're a medium-sized family, and I'm currently the so I'm the second born, so I had to think about it. So it's my sister, so it's my parents, then it's my sister, and then myself. So my sister's 40 right now, I'm 37. Then my brother that's after me is, I'm 37, so he's, it's so funny, I have to calculate everything now. So he's 30, and then the youngest one is 26, 25. 26. Something like that. So
what are all their names?
Okay, so the oldest one, well, my parents, my dad is Héctor Javier Morales. My mom is Yolanda Morales, or Davila de Morales. My sister is now, she changed her name. She's married, so she's Yolanda, that's so funny. Yolanda Morales Flores. Yeah, I get confused. But we call her Chelly, so if you hear me by any chance refer to anybody, that's Chelly. And then it's myself, and then my brother is the same as my dad, Héctor Javier Morales. There's no junior, it's just the same name. And then the youngest one is Pedro Alberto Morales.
So when you were growing up, was education sort of a topic in the family, going to college?
So we were very fortunate. It was, but my parents, especially my mom, she was very much an advocate for education, but she kind of didn't know much about it. So my dad was educated until his 6th grade year in elementary school, and that was partly by choice. Unfortunately, fortunately he wanted to be a veterinarian, but unfortunately there was a teacher that wasn't doing good in school, especially in science subjects. So she told him, like, oh, you're not going to amount to anything, and which is interesting because he went to really good private schools. So, but I mean, I guess people are going to be mean wherever you go. It doesn't matter. But so he decided after 6th grade, well, if I'm just wasting my time, I'm just going to leave school. So he did, and he began working. Then my mom actually did finish. That's interesting too, because in her hometown, they only had up to 6th grade. They didn't have any more, so she had to move to the city, which they did to continue her education. She did, and she graduated high school, and she even got like a certificate program. It wasn't through a college. It was like a technical school, and she got a certificate for bilingual secretary at the time. So my mom and actually, she wanted to be a teacher. So when she told her parents she wanted to go to college and study education, unfortunately, my grandfather told her that's not a possibility because it's horrible to admit, but the teachers are whores. So you don't go into that type of education, or you don't go into that field, basically. So my mom, both of them, unfortunately, were kind of truncated in regards to their education. So they both were advocates for it, more my mom than my dad. But kind of not knowing what to suggest. So they were like, yes, you need to get educated. And my mom she loves reading. So we were very fortunate to have books in our house growing up. So even that was, I think, very rare because most of our community, like friends and stuff, didn't have that push of like, oh yes, let's read, let's get educated, even if that's not the field that you want to go into. So education was definitely a big priority, but without the knowledge of how to even get there. And especially since we moved to the U.S., they both had only navigated the Mexican system of education. So having to try to figure out, I mean, even just the grades. I remember when we came to the U.S. and everything in Mexico was 1 to 10 in regards to grading, like a grading scale. And here it's A, B, C, D, there's no E, and it's the F. So it's like, wait, what's going on? So even navigating through that was kind of interesting. But regardless, the push for education was always there. Yes.
So are you first generation college?
Yes. So I am first generation college student. Regardless of what country you look at, because I know some students are like, yeah, I'm first generation college in the U.S. But no, my parents, like I said, did not get a college education, or even like I said, even the certification program that my mom went through wasn't even a university or college. It was like a little technical school. So yes, I am first generation. Most of my siblings are, well, all of my siblings are too. And only out of the 4 siblings, my sister and myself are the only ones that have bachelor's and a master's, and I have partial PhD. I didn't finish it. So, but my youngest 2 brothers they started college and they decided not to continue it. So
what was it like growing up?
I realize it was very different. To me, it was normal. Like, I mean, it was just, I moved a lot, actually. So I mentioned that I was between 2 cities, or between 2 countries, actually. And so every 2 years I changed schools, which was weird. And it wasn't because my parents were like, oh, you need to move schools, or it was just by coincidence. So, and even like I mentioned, even when I lived in Mexico, there was times that I went to school in the U.S., so I never realized how much of a privilege that was, especially the fact that the sacrifices that my mom had to make, like, so we had to wake up at 5 a.m, get ready to go to school. This is like, if I'm talking about if we were living in Mexico at the time and going to school in the U.S., so we'd have to wake up at 5 a.m, get ready, get into uniforms. My mom would, cross the border to take us. And at the time, thank goodness, it was only about 30 minutes. But still, it's a sacrifice to every morning have to drive you to a different country and take you to school so you could be there on time and things like that. So, but to me, it was normal. Like I said, it was, I never thought anything of it until I think the first time I started to realize it, that it was a little bit different was when I was in junior high, because I had gone back to Mexico. And even though most of my friends, they teach them, English since you're growing up in Mexico, but it was very different. I realized that they couldn't go back and forth between languages as easily as I could. So then I realized, this is different. The way I grew up is different, and especially in regards to education. Because other stuff, like I said, I went back to Mexico, so we still play on the streets basketball. It'd still be, all the regular stuff. And but growing up, I think it was just interesting to see the opportunities that we had, that even though, let's say, we were very fortunate that we were able to go to private school, and sometimes it was on scholarship because it was financially, we weren't all there, but still that opportunity wasn't either given to or received by other people. So that was, it's a major thing that now I realize the difference. Before it was just like, oh, it's just life, so.
So it was you and all your siblings were doing this back and forth?
So it was mostly my older sister and myself, and then, okay, so let me see, and actually I'll go back into it. My sister did a little bit longer school in Mexico, I think, so I actually, let's see, kindergarten, and so in Mexico we have 3 years of kindergarten, and so my first 2 years of kindergarten were done in Mexico. Then I did kindergarten again here in the U.S., first and second grade, and then I went back. And I did third and fourth grade in Mexico. Then I came back, and I did fifth, sixth, and seventh in the U.S., 2 different schools. And then I went back, and I did ninth grade in Mexico, and then I did my last 3 years in the U.S. So as you can tell, it was kind of a back and forth of where I did schooling. It was very confusing. But, it wasn't confusing. Now it's very confusing. But... and my sister did that as well, except for her high school. She finished high school over there. So at the time, we had the opportunity, I had the opportunity to move with my grandparents. So that's what we did to, come back to school here. But my sister stayed with my parents in Mexico to finish her high school degree over there. And then she came back for college. But then my younger siblings, so since we're kind of... from me to the one that's after me, it's 6 years, and then 12 years from me to the youngest. Since it's such an age difference, by the time that they were in school, most of their school was in the U.S. So actually, the youngest one, all of his schooling was in the U.S., but the one right after me, Hector, he did several years of kindergarten. I think just kindergarten in Mexico, and then he did the rest in the U.S. So it was mostly my sister and myself that went through that, going back and forth. The other ones didn't as much. By then, we were fully established in the U.S. So.
Now, you kind of mentioned this when I asked you about yourself, but how did you first hear about Oklahoma State University?
So it was, like I said, it was by coincidence. I was taking in undergrad, I was studying psychology, and I was taking a primate behavior class. And my professor at the time, Dr. James Aldridge, James Aldridge, which is the female one. That's why it's confusing, the James part. But she, I think, had gotten a degree from OSU. I'm not very sure about that because I remember trying to look for her thesis and I couldn't find it. But she had at one point said that she had come to OSU, and I didn't know if it was for a degree or just, to do research. I don't know. But so she had received an email from, at the time, Dr. Melanie Page, promoting this REU program, Research Experience for Undergrads, from NSF, National Science Foundation. And so in her primate behavior class, she announced it. She said, hey, there's this opportunity for an internship, psychology internship at Oklahoma State University, if anybody wants to apply. And at the time, there wasn't that many psychology internships. I don't think there was that many internships to begin with at the time, but for psychology, even less. So I was like, oh, yes, of course I'll take it. So, and I actually was interested in research, but the interesting part is where I was at, it's a teaching institution. Now it's becoming more research, but at the time it was mostly teaching. So coming to OSU or seeing that opportunity, I was like, I have to go there because I need to get some experience. So yeah, I took the opportunity, and coming to OSU is amazing. So that's the first time I found out about it. And when I got accepted was, it was so eye-opening just to see such a big library, just so many resources that, even though my university was pretty big, it's the environment was very different. So, but anyway, so yeah, going back to it, that's how I found out about OSU.
So what were your first thoughts when you first arrived on campus?
Well, I actually had been to another university before, not in regards to psychology, and a little bit different experience. So, but I went to University of Laval in Quebec as a study abroad opportunity, and I remember there thinking, oh my goodness, this is humongous. There's streets in between the university. So when I came to OSU, I thought the same thing. I thought, oh my goodness, it's so big. But it didn't surprise me as much because I had already seen a university that was that big. But then what was very different was like the architecture, just to see what you normally see on TV. I know this sounds very cliche, but what you normally see on TV of American universities. Well, my university, even though it was American, it wasn't like that. It didn't look like that. Having this like old looking architecture. And so I remember coming in and seeing the library. And I think that was one of my biggest impacts, was honestly the library. Just the outside was like, to me, just opening those copper doors to me is amazing. I still I love them. They're so freaking heavy, but I love them. So that was one of my biggest surprises, was just seeing such an amazingly big library within the university. And I don't. It seemed like a very beautiful campus. One thing that still surprises me, that I remember thinking then and still thinking now, was there's no OSU sign. There's no where you can go to take, you go in universities and there's the entrance sign of, here, welcome to such and such university. Well, OSU has a maroon type plaque, brownish plaque, that's marble over by the gardens by Theta Pond, but it's not orange, and it doesn't have a big OSU sign. So I remember that was another thing that I was like, I can't take a picture. Where am I going to take a picture? But anyways, that was my biggest impression. So I remember just the structure of it, architecture, how big it was, and the resources it had. I think those are my biggest impressions of OSU.
So how long were you here for that internship?
That was 2 months or 3 months. It was May to July, so maybe 2.5 months about. And even though it was in, that was, let me see, summer of 2000, and I graduated 2002, so 2001, summer of 2001. And so even, actually, that's another thing, that the university looked very different, too. I mean, Boone Pickens Stadium wasn't there. It was Lewis Field. And I remember even that seemed ginormous to me. So I don't know what it would have been like to come to Boone Pickens and be like, oh, my goodness. So, yeah, it looked very different. But, yeah, that was in 2001. And I forgot your question.
How long your first day was here?
Oh, yeah. So about 2.5 months, yeah. And it was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was end of May to, middle of May to end of July. So.
At that time, did you look for or see other Hispanics in the area?
I did. And there was hardly any. So at the time, and it's still active now, but at the time there was LDCC that actually was active during the summers. So LDCC is the Latin Dance and Cultural Club. And so that organization basically had students teach other students salsa dancing, a lot of the Caribbean, not just Caribbean, but a lot of the Caribbean dances. And I remember that summer being here, actually, in the cohort that was there for that group, there was 2 Hispanics, and both of us came from the same university, and it's actually my best friend and myself. So it was really funny because we came here and we're we both knew each other, and so we got here and we're like, okay. And so we weren't, I don't know, it wasn't like, oh, it's very white, but it was different. The culture, I don't know, I guess part of it is I'm very open in regards to culture, and actually the high school that I went to in Texas is and this is horrible, but it's the white high school. So we, because it's 90% Hispanic where I go, but that high school wasn't. It was maybe about 50-50 at the time. And so to me, that wasn't going to be a big shock, and going to undergrad in Pan Am also was a little bit diverse. And so the majority is Hispanic, but there was other cultures there. So that wasn't the biggest difference. I think it was the cultural difference. So because of that, missing to hear Spanish radio, Spanish TV, music. So we did look for, those other Hispanic people on campus. And we couldn't really find them. Even in LDCC, there was actually a lot of Indians at the time teaching classes. And they were amazing. So there were a great group of people, too. But that was, I think, the way that we found keeping or being able to identify with other people here on campus. Because at least they knew the culture. Even though they were Indian, they were like, oh, yeah, we listen to Spanish music. We appreciate the culture of the dance or things like that. So that was really cool. But other than that, I don't think we met that many other Hispanic people, because even, unfortunately, like where we were at, we were in Patchins and Jones and then North Murray, and since we were doing research and stuff all the time, we didn't really have, except for the library, we didn't really have an outlet to meet people unless somebody else happened to know them. And so because of that, I didn't meet any of the people that either might have worked here at the time. Patricia Diaz was one of the only ones I met, but she works in the psychology department. And that was it. I don't think, that particular summer, I think there wasn't that many Hispanic people that I met at all.
So where did you live during those 2 months?
In Patchins and Jones. So, they had the university actually, or the program gave us those locations to live in. So all of us lived in Patchins and Jones, just the different wings of it. But.
So then you left, finished school,
mm-hmm.
And then what did you do after that?
So you mean my undergrad? Or
you finished your undergrad?
Yeah, so that was during my undergrad years, and I finished undergrad. And that was actually, so when I came here was the summer before I graduated. So I finished that next year, and I knew, well, actually that whole next year was the process of applying here. At the time, I was debating between child psychology and animal behavior. And unfortunately, I had a bad encounter with a child psychologist back in undergrad, kind of similar to my dad's, like, no, with that GPA, you're not going to get anywhere, and you're not going to even, get admitted to a program. So unfortunately, I partially believed him, and I only applied to animal behavior programs. And so one of them was here. And so I was like, why apply anywhere else? If I knew I liked it, if I, liked the professor, let me just apply here. And so that's all I did. I had just applied to OSU. So that was the next year. So that next year, it was GREs. It was, at the time, we had to take subject GREs. I was prepping for all that, applying, getting into OSU, and I found out in March that I got in, so I was like, woohoo! So then after that, I was like, okay, just prepping for coming to OSU. So that the next summer, I actually went to work in Walt Disney World. That's a totally different thing for the summer, and which actually was interesting because prior to that, not that summer, I had done an internship for Walt Disney World, but it was also animal behavior based. So that actually kind of still tied me into OSU to kind of be like, yeah, you should do this. This is what you want to do. Which is interesting because that's not what I do now. But but yeah, so that's what happened. And then I came in August and started grad school.
So what was it like coming to campus the second time?
It was actually different. I mean, it was still very like, oh, you admire it, it looks awesome. But it's like, okay, it's game time. Now, it's not so much you're on tour, you're looking around. It's like, okay, you have to like find resources and get your stuff done for grad school. So it was really cool. Actually the first several years for grad school were very much about, okay, what do I need to do for grad school? What I need to do, because I felt, and I was, ill-prepared for it. As I mentioned, my undergrad was not a research institution, or it wasn't at the time, so I felt like I had to do a lot of catching up. And so those first several years, it was just kind of North Murray. But once I kind of let my guard down in the sense of, okay, I got the kind of gist of it, I can do this, then a different side of OSU came out to me, which was getting very involved with the International Student Organization, with the Latin American Student Association, with LDCC for just dances and things like that. So then I started to meet more of the OSU culture in regards to its people. started going to football games, different things like that. So that was, I guess, this different side of OSU that I saw, but I didn't see it immediately. I saw it after like 2 years of being here.
So your first time was during the summer. So then during the regular semesters, the fall and spring, did you notice more Hispanics then?
Well, actually, when I came for grad school, still no. The summer really didn't make a difference. It wasn't, I mean, there was, but there was very few of us back then. I remember going to HOLA, which is the Hispanic Orientation of Leadership Associations, hosted by the Hispanic Student Association. And I remember going to HSA meetings, and honestly, there was sometimes 6 people there, and they were mostly officers of the organization. So not to mean that there was only 6 Hispanics on campus. I know that there's more, but in the sense of people seeking their own people or whatever, it was very, very few. In my department, there was only 2 Hispanics, myself and another young lady, Elaine Fernandez, but she was very Americanized. I mean, she didn't speak Spanish. She didn't eat anything that was Hispanic, even though both her parents were Mexican American. I think she had been here for generations, because I remember her telling me, like, no, I don't really like tortillas. And I was like, what? Like, how is that possible? Like, no. So yeah, so it was very different, because you would meet a lot of people like that were, you know, second, third generation. That, I mean, of course they are Hispanic, but that, what you're looking for, like the culture, the language, the traditions, they're not really there. So it's like, oh, okay, well, then nice to have that last name, you know? I don't know. So it was very different. So yeah, so that second time that I came, honestly, from the summer to the regular school year, in regards to seeing more Hispanics, it didn't make much of a difference. It was still very few people. I think over years it made a difference, but not initially, no.
So as a student who was moving here from South Texas, northern Mexico, how did that affect you, not having a Hispanic community or Mexican community in the area? Or did it?
I know that in certain aspects it did, like, and not all the time. And I think my personality is very different to most people too. Like, I tend to be very positive, so I'm like, yeah, sure, and I'll make the best of everything or whatever. But I mean, there'd be times, of course, that we crave certain foods and I couldn't get them at Walmart. Now we can, thank goodness, but at the time it wasn't a possibility. I think the Hispanic aisle at the time only had like tortillas and rice, which is really funny. But so that's, I think, how it affected me the most was, I specifically remember, with my dad, we used to watch like old Mexican movies, like the ones from the 30s or 20s. I don't even know what years they are. Maybe they're older, but I mean, anyways. I remember purposefully buying movies from Pedro Infante or whatever, because I would get nostalgic, and I wouldn't have that type of stuff here. So when I would go down to the valley, I'd buy them and I'd randomly like start watching them here in DVD. And it was just a way for me to like, okay, I'm back in my little zone of listening to Spanish or whatever. So I guess it did affect me a few times, but not anything that I remember just like, oh, it was really bad or... So overall, I don't think it was that bad. But yeah, I think especially, like you said, somebody from South Texas, you always look for those things. You always look, I mean, regardless of where you're from, you always look to identify with people, right? And so the ways that I would identify was, speaking Spanish or... It's really interesting because, I mean, of course, and you hear me now, I'm completely comfortable speaking in English. But I remember someone saying, this particular person was actually... like they had just gone here, so it made more sense for them, but I identified that they were talking to me in Spanish, and they said, after a whole day of speaking in English, I'm tired, like I just want to talk in Spanish. I was like, yeah, me too. And so it's interesting because I know that they meant, that they have to struggle with their English because they had only been here for a few weeks. It was a visiting professor that said that. And even though I have been here, I mean, the majority of my life, it is, I mean, I talk English at school and work and whatever, but at home it's Spanish. So, and at the time actually all of my roommates, most of my roommates have been English speaking roommates. So, I mean, I didn't even have that to be able to go home and kind of like, oh, ¿qué estás haciendo? Or whatever. No, that wasn't there. I had, it's like, oh my goodness, do I ever get to speak Spanish again? So I think those are the times that I saw it, that it affected me, or that I noticed that it was like, oh my goodness, I have to cope with this or whatever. But
were you on a scholarship when you were here?
Yeah, so the psychology program actually offers, well, I don't think there's a name for it, but it's kind of a full ride, basically, through a graduate assistantship, and if you meet the criteria that they ask, they do fund your way through graduate school. All you had to pay was a small amount of fees, I think, at the time. And so it was, I was here on scholarship, but I don't think it had a name. It was just the department that gave it to us, as long as we had the requirements. But, you know, it's interesting because even that was a whole different dynamic. In undergrad, I was very fortunate, like, because we were low income, I got FAFSA and everything was covered. I mean, even sometimes because of the low cost of the university, we even had money left over to potentially buy a computer or things that we needed for school. And so then coming here and still thinking, oh, okay, you know, I'm going to be able to handle it. I will have this money or whatever. But then I realized, wait, I don't live with my parents. I have to manage, you know, rent and food, and realizing that my lifestyle was very different to that of my roommates, because my roommate was like, oh yeah, let's eat out all the time. And I was like, wait, I've never really eaten out, because at home, we always eat at home. So, I mean, even that was an interesting dynamic to have to figure out. Yes, you do have a full ride, but how do you make that work? Because you still have these bills to pay. And so that was very interesting, actually. And seeing the difference in culture of, I remember even asking her at one time, well, I mean, what did your mom cook? And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, she's like, okay, I understand that you don't like some of my spicy food, so then you cook. She's like, well, I only know how to cook eggs and pasta, but spaghetti. And I was like, and I don't really like spaghetti. I mean, I do, but it's not like I can have it every day. So I was like, doesn't your mom cook? And she's like, well, like Stofers. And I was like, oh my goodness. So it was such a different culture. And granted, I know that not everybody's like her family, but it just happened that was who my roommate was. So that was my experience. So it was very different.
So what kind of work did you do when you were here?
My first 2 years, I was actually a GA for Patricia Diaz in the Psychology of Diversified Students program. So I did a lot of work for her in regards to, at the time we had like a small newsletter of resources for students that were of underrepresented population, so minority students in the program. So we would, I'd Google different scholarships that were available, jobs, internships, things that were opportunities for grad students, which at the time was not many either. But so I did that. I did a lot of like secretarial type work inside the office. That was my first 2 years. And then my third year, I did a TA for 2 semesters. I taught 2 classes in fall, 2 classes in spring. And then my fourth year, I was a I don't remember the exact title, but I was a lab technician, basically, for one of the labs here on campus that belonged to the psychology department, but it was in the speech department. So that's what I did, yeah.
Okay, so then graduation.
Mm-hmm. Can I tell you, I don't know if you're going to ask me about graduation, but I'm going to tell you a story about graduation that definitely talks about my culture. And I love it to this day. People still remember it. It's funny. So for my graduation, my whole family came. And at the time, it was my siblings, my parents, my brother-in-law. So, pretty much everybody in my immediate family came. So we have at home, we bought them, I think I don't know if it was maybe they bought them for my graduation or it was high school. I don't know. But we bought some matracas. They're these big noise makers. But so they're the ones that you twist like this. But instead of normally the play ones are like about this small. But these were about this big. And they're wooden and they're big. And so we were in Gallagher-Iba and I was walking for graduation. And so sure enough, here's like my family's like way on the top or whatever. And here, Brenda Morales, whatever. I mean, they start making like so much noise. So to me, it's like, yay, so much noise. I love it. And people, I mean, instead of people focusing on who was graduating, it was like, boom, to the family. It was so, so funny to see. And people, like, it was such a different experience to see. Some people were like, oh, like kind of even disgusted, like, why are they making so much noise? But then there was others that are, I guess, the culture is similar to ours, because a lot of Indians were the ones like, yeah, woo, So it was really, really cool to see that even how we celebrate certain milestones in our life is very different. And so that to me brings me so much joy. I still, it's so funny because people will say like, your parents were the ones with the big, yes, those were my parents. So anyway, that was graduation.
What year was this?
In 2005 when I walked, yeah.
Now, when they started making the noise, did you notice a reaction from anyone on stage?
Yes. Even, I'm telling you, like, literally the whole, like, Gallagher I was like, I mean, even I think when I was shaking hands with, I don't remember who it was, one of the deans, I'm guessing, or something, that I was shaking hands with them, even them initially were like, they were, of course they tried to focus, but they're like, what's going on? So, I mean, because it was a lot of noise. So it is an attention grabber, even if you don't want to turn. Yeah, so.
So you graduated and you left.
Mm-hmm.
So what brought you back?
So I was very, very fortunate the way that I got the job. I left, and I honestly, I mean, I think like most of us, if you go to university, you think, okay, well, I got what I needed to get. Now I need to look for a job. And as I mentioned before, my area of expertise was animal behavior. So I thought, okay, I'm going to work at a zoo doing research or a place maybe like Disney's Animal Kingdom, Busch Gardens, something that has basically a lot of animals, and either do training or do research with animals. So I did start looking, and unfortunately nothing was coming about. I had experience before of working at a Girl Scout camp in Colorado, so they called me up and they said, hey, do you want to be our assistant camp director? And I said, yes, because I need a job. And so I left for a few months, but they told me it's just going to be a few months. And I said, yeah, that's fine. So when I left for that in Colorado, it was from March to August. So come July, I started looking for jobs again because I was like, okay, I need to really get a full-time job. And right around the same time, a friend of mine, Adelina Longoria, she was a graduate student here at the time as well, called me up and said, hey, there's a position, Hispanic coordinator on campus that is open. You should apply. And I was like, no, like, what's the point of me going back to campus? Like, I mean, and that's not even my degree. That's not my area of expertise. And so she's like, well, you should consider it. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I mean, I told like, yeah, sure, but I'm like, I'm not going to apply. So then another friend of mine calls, which is another close friend, Javier Flores. And he calls too, and he's like, hey, did you know that this position is available here in OSU? And I said, well, Adelina called me, and he's like, well, you should apply. And I said, no, I mean, what am I going to do there? Like, no. And I actually had met the people that were previously in those positions, but I know this sounds really kind of dumb, but I met them, and I knew how good of a resource they were for undergrad students, but I didn't know overall what they did. So even for me to apply, I was like, okay, what can I offer to this position? I don't even know what it overall does, besides be there for students. So then that was that. And Adelina kept on calling me or texting me, and I was like, no, like, leave me alone, no. Several weeks passed, and Dr. Figueroa, which was, at the time, he was director of I think it was diversity academic support or something related to that. And so he called me up, and he had been actually one of the coordinators before. And he called me up, and he's like, hey, Adelina mentioned that you don't have a job. You should apply to this job. And I was like, no, like, why don't you guys leave me alone? He's like, no, but just consider it. And I said, okay, sure, whatever. So once again, I was like, yeah, whatever. Well, right after him, maybe like a day or two later, Dr. Thomas, which at the time was the VP for institutional diversity, called me up. And I had actually met when I was president, because I was president of the International Student Organization in 2005. And I had met him because of that, because of the meetings that they have. And so anyways, so he called me up and he said, hey, Brenda, he's like, long time no, talk to you, whatever. He's like, I heard you don't have a job. you should think about applying. And so once the VP calls you, I was like, yes, sir. Okay, I'll, make sure to apply. So, of course, the next day I applied. And then the rest is history. I came for an interview. I really enjoyed the interview. They gave me a better understanding of what the position was. I mean, then once I read the position and then when I came, I realized, like, I love this. I love working with students. Like, I mean, with people, like, why would I not apply to this? So I applied and I interviewed, like I said, and I got accepted, and so I came back.
So what are your job responsibilities? Well, what's your job title and then your job responsibilities?
So my job title has changed a little bit, so not a lot. I'm currently coordinator of Hispanic and Latino affairs within the Office of Multicultural Affairs. And my overall job responsibilities is kind of a breadth of things. So we do a lot of recruitment, retention, and push to graduation of students. And in my particular instances for Hispanic Latino students. And so we get a list of all the students that identify as Hispanic and Latino and provide them with resources, maybe through different organizations that may pertain to their field, or even through Hispanic Student Association, which I advise, or I send them emails about once a month, letting them know about different scholarships, different internship opportunities, different things that might be available to them. So basically, all the little things that we mostly do, or I mostly do throughout the year, are stuff that are going to help them stay here. Make sure that they're doing good in their classes. I mean, I don't check their grades one-on-one, but if I establish a relationship with the students, then I do. So I'm not required to do that. It's just something that I've learned that it helps them. If they, they always, not they always say, but some of them say that I'm like their aunt, or like their mom away from home or stuff like that. And so it's kind of that job that I take on. It's basically like watching for them, making sure that they're doing good in their classes or overall. Like, because sometimes they might be doing okay in their classes, but you see that their demeanor changes. So it's a very broad spectrum of stuff that I do, but it's basically helping students overall here at OSU.
So what year was it that you were hired?
In fall of 2007. And I laugh because I remember specifically telling my dad, like, I'll just be there 2 years, I'll get experience, and then I'll get another job. 8.5 years later, I'm still here. But I love it. I think that's why I didn't leave, is because it's become so hard to leave when you actually like what you do. So,
So how much have you seen the Hispanic culture or the students change in the time you've been here?
Oh, my goodness. It's been such a blessing. It's such a difference. It's so interesting because I mentioned, having the experience of being here as a student and seeing very few students, Hispanic Latino students on campus, to when I started working, there was 427, if I remember correctly, students, Hispanic Latino students. But even then, you would go to the meetings, the HSA meetings, and now you'd start to see more. You'd see about 20 students go, but once again, the majority of them were the officers, and then the others were just other students. So that was when I started working, was in 2007, fall, and we've seen such a growth. I mean, every year has been an amazing growth of population of Hispanic Latino students. Right now, the numbers are at, this was of last year. I don't know the incoming class yet, but last year was 1,537 students, something like that. So just to see that growth in numbers, I mean, it's amazing. And a lot of my students will still come in, especially the new ones will be like, I come in and I don't see any Hispanics. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't see any Hispanics? What do we look like? And so they're like, and they stay quiet. Of course you stay quiet because we look so different. Some of us get confused for African American. Some of us get confused for white. Some of us get confused for Native American. And then there's unfortunately, if you want to say it like that, the stereotypical ones of, you're a little bit brown and you're short or whatever. Then you're Hispanic. So yeah, but they'll realize that when they go to the meetings now, the HSA meetings, we have an average of 70 to 80 students going every meeting, which is amazing. I mean, it's just really amazing to see such a growth. And we still have, of course, the range of from I don't speak Spanish and I barely know my culture to I speak and breathe and everything Hispanic that I can do, I mean, so you have everybody, but it's really cool because that camaraderie has really been established, regardless of where you're at within your identity of Hispanic and Latino culture.
So what's the makeup of the students in the Hispanic Student Association?
In regards to...
Or on campus, like where Mexican American...
The majority, I mean, there's no way for me to know that except for by asking them. Sorry. Sorry.
Salud.
Thank you. Gracias. There's no real way for me to know that except for, like I said, just asking the self-identifying, but even then self-identifying with me, not with a piece of paper. So the majority, sorry, and I'm getting these numbers, let's say, from HSA, because I know that some of our students have said, like, well, you guys don't represent, let's say, I don't know, Dominicans or Puerto Ricans. And so on the contrary, we've told them, like, no, you guys need to come so we can start representing them. But the majority, I would say 2/3 of our Hispanic Latino students, or even more probably, are Mexican American. And then the other third, or less than that, like I said, is, I mean, from everywhere. It could be, we've had more Guatemalan Salvadorians, we had a few Costa Ricans. There was a few years ago that there was quite a few Puerto Ricans. There isn't now, or at least not to my knowledge. So that fluctuates too, because actually right now there's a lot of Venezuelans. And so, so I don't know if it also has to do with generational moves, I guess, from different countries to the U.S. But right now, still the majority is Mexican American, and then there's a few from different countries, or their parents are from different countries.
So can you tell a difference between the Hispanic students from 2007 and those from 2016?
Well, I mean, yes, in different aspects, and then no in different aspects. So, I mean, just overall, I think every student that comes in, or this is one of the things that I love to tell them because they laugh at it, but is almost every single student comes in with an idea of, like, I got this, even though they're scared. You know, they're scared beyond their mind. They come in freshman year and they like, oh, well, you know, I already got this. I did high school and I got good grades, or I was okay. So I know where to find resources, or I know where to do this and that and whatever. And then they realize how little they know. And so, or how to communicate with others. They thought, oh, you know, I got this. I'm great. I'm social. I'm this. I'm that. And then you realize, no, everybody comes from a different background, or not only that, but different communities. So you respond differently to different things. And so that is still the same. It's so funny. Year after year after year, every, you know, freshman class comes in, or first year, class comes in, and it's that identity of, I got this. And, you know, senior year, they're like, oh my goodness, this is so scary. What am I going to do? And so, because they've learned so much. So that's still there. But I think pride has changed. And that's actually a really good thing. And I mean pride in our culture. I think when I first started in 2007, students would definitely identify as Hispanic or Latino, but it was, they didn't know what to expect when they had to say it out loud to other people. Was it going to be, a stereotype of, oh, yeah, I love Mexican food, or, you know, different things like that, to where now they don't care if, you know, not that they don't care, but, I mean, they might, but they're still proud of saying it. Like, so I think, like, so here is an example. If people would have said back then, like, oh, what are you? Well, that in itself is already, like, you know, you're already like, So back then, I think people were like, well, what do you mean? Like, why? Some would say it, but they would still, like, be reluctant to, like, why are you asking me this? Versus now, it's like, whoa, well, I'm Puerto Rican. Why? Like, well, you know, so they're more prideful of their culture, where they came from, or yeah, I'm from Enid, or I'm from wherever, you know. There's definitely more pride there. And I think, of course, times have changed, even just in the U.S. in regards to how we as Latinos perceive ourselves. I know that, you know, it's funny because over time, I know that, you know, especially California, those areas, the Chicano movement was a long time ago. So there was pride there a long time ago. But the rest of the country didn't get it because we didn't have that many Hispanics to still feel prideful, of the situation or of what was going on. But now I think, now they see, the importance of numbers or how many people, identify with them or have the same issues or come from the same background or, it's really funny to hear their stories of, do you remember when you had a parent-teacher conference meeting and you had to translate for your mom? And all of them have those stories. So it's really funny because not all of them, but the majority of them. And actually they have so many things in common, but they take pride in them, which is really cool. Recently, we did a game, actually, in one of the HSA meetings where if you would ask a question and they would move to one side if the answer was yes, and you would move to the other side if the answer was no. So one of the questions was, if you're an only child, move to this side. If you're not, so of course the majority of the room was to we have big families, or not big families, but we don't really know the concept of only child within our culture. And then another question was, are you a first generation college student? And 100%, all of the students within that meeting were, with the exception of one, sorry. So 99% were first generation. And even then their faces, I think before would have been you slowly move, you're looking away, but you move to you answer that you are. But now everybody's like, yeah, we are. And it's okay. We're here to help each other, So the pride has definitely changed with time.
So in the time that you've been working here and working with Hispanic students, what's the most meaningful experience that you've had?
I've had several, but I think they all tie into one thing. It's the growth that I see in them. And that, it brings tears to my eyes every time. So seeing them from their first year here, it might not be their freshman year. It might, be that they transferred in. But to see, I've had students that came into my office when they were juniors in high school, considering their parents brought them or Gear Up brought them, because many of our students are from those type of programs. And having no clue, no clue of what they wanted to do, and there's a specific student that I remember. Like I said, I've cried with quite a few students because it's the growth that I see in them. But I remember so many things about this particular student. I met him. He doesn't remember that I met him in his junior year of high school, but he came to a program that the engineering department had for high school students, and I met him there. And I just remember him being funny and mischievous and whatever, and coming his freshman year and meeting him again, and we got acquainted and really close. And I remember telling him not, of course, not his first day of school, but within a few weeks or within whatever, I said, just as much as you ask questions, you look like you like research. You should consider that. Look into this program, the OOHRP program. And he's like, you're insane. I don't like research. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. And so it's things that you have to continue with them, right? Okay, you should try. And I remember also telling this particular student, you love to explore. You should think about, have you ever left the country? And they're like, well, just to Mexico, and I think just once or whatever. So study abroad. And they're like, no, but how am I going to do that? Well, this student just graduated, is going to grad school to do research, and studied abroad 3 times during his undergrad career. So those are the experiences that, it's so awesome to me. It's so heartwarming. And I remember, it's so funny because you just made me think of this. I remember when I first started here, there was no students in my office, and I remember complaining to you about that. Nobody comes to my office, there's no students, they don't love me, they don't, whatever. And part of it is they didn't know me yet, and so having to, get this repertoire of, come to my office, feel comfortable, come in, and from that to, now, sometimes it's so funny because I can't get them out. They're there, and they're like, so, what are we doing? And I'm like, leave, I need to do work. So it's a very heartwarming experience or just events that I go through, but it's mostly because of their growth, seeing the growth that they go through.
So now just about you, What's your happiest moment?
In general?
Yeah.
Ooh. I don't know if I could say I have one. In my life or in like school, OSU related?
Up to you.
I have so many. I don't think I have one. Yeah, I think I have so many because there's so many different things, and I love adventure, so I love traveling. I recently got married, so that was another thing that I thought impossible. It was a very awesome experience for me. Not only because I got married, but I was able to get married in India. My husband's Indian, so I was able to go get married in India. So that was, an amazing experience. I love adventure, so I went skydiving, and that's like so much. Like, I mean, I don't know. There's so many things. So yeah, I don't know.
So you mentioned getting married and being surprised by that.
Yeah.
So where did you meet your husband?
At OSU. And our cake had orange because of OSU. So I met him here. I was working at the time already, so it was when I came back for work, and he was a PhD student in mechanical and aerospace engineering. And actually, in graduate school, I had met an Italian friend, Carlo Branca is his name. And he, kind of like us, that you asked me, like, did you find other Hispanic students? Well, he's Italian. He looked for other Italians, and there was nobody. Poor guy at the time. This was a long time ago. Now there's more Italians. But so he didn't have anybody, so he hung out with the Latinos because that was, like, as close as he could get to his culture. So I met him through that, and we became really close friends, and we would hang out and stuff. And so when I came back to work, we would have lunch together every day. And it was him, myself, and another friend, Karina. And so we'd have lunch every day. And then when Carlo, during that time that I came back, he actually finished his master's and got a job. But he went for the job for like a week, I think. And he came back, he's like, this is not for me. And when he came back for a PhD program. And it was with the same professor that my husband was working with already. And so because of that, since we were meeting up for lunch, he started inviting my husband, at the time he wasn't my husband, but he started inviting Aravind to lunch, and that's how I met him. So it wasn't anything like, I don't know. It wasn't anything like, I don't know, but it was over time. We were friends for 3 years, and I would have never expected it like that, to be honest. I mean, maybe meeting somebody at the university, yes, but I don't know, not the way that it happened, but I'm glad that it did, and it's really awesome. So he's an awesome husband.
So what are your dreams for the future?
Oh, I have so many, and they change all the time too. I think many of us are scared of potentially changing career paths because we've studied and we have so much pride in what we studied and whatever. And so changing career paths is very scary. But I think I might do that. I don't know to what yet. But a passion of mine has always been singing and dancing, things like that. And so when I was growing up, the role models, I guess, that I had for that were all, in Mexico. So living in a country where there was hardly any last names that were like mine or that had the ability to speak both languages, so I didn't see that as a possibility. So unfortunately, I never pursued it. And granted, that's my mistake, not, but the older I get, the more I realize that I shouldn't be scared for that. Like, I should try it. And if it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen. But I should try something, And so lately I've been thinking about what I want to do. And especially because, like I said, I love my job and I've been there for 8.5 years. But I don't want to see myself there past 10 years. So a goal of mine was always a PhD as well. So I've been contemplating doing a PhD in business. But then I've also been contemplating, like, well, maybe I should go in the singing and acting type of thing, like actually get training for that and see if that, does anything for me. Not for me. For me, it will. I will enjoy it. I know for a fact. But if other people will actually cast me on stuff, So regardless, I don't know necessarily what my dream is. I don't have like a concrete dream, I guess. But whatever it is, I know it'll be with a career, a career change or a path career change or whatever. But I'm excited. It's interesting. A lot of people get, like I said, a lot of people get so scared about it. And don't get me wrong, I am. But I'm very excited too, because we only live once. And I actually just heard the commencement speaker the other day, and he was funny too, because he actually didn't finish his PhD either. I don't remember his name, unfortunately. But he was doing a PhD in accounting, I think it was. And he decided to not finish his degree. Well, he didn't decide it like that. He wanted to pursue singing and writing songs, and he went to Nashville, and he made it. He did well for himself. And so that also made me think, like, I had already been contemplating it before, but I was like, you're throwing signs at me. So that was really cool. And to see that, there's so many of us that go through those paths, but we think that we're alone on it. We think that we're the only ones that are thinking like that. And so granted, I don't know this gentleman, but he was at OSU. He went through the same situation. So that was really cool to see, like, I could probably do this too. Who knows if I'll be famous like he will? I don't know. But at least I want to try. And that's, when he left school, that's what he said. He's like, I don't know if I'll make it, but I at least want to try. And so that's, I guess, my dream, to at least try.
So is there anything, thinking about the work you do here at OSU, working with Hispanic students, is there anything that you would say to current or future Hispanic students?
My goodness. Well, two things that I always tell students, and I think you've kind of gotten it too from what I talked about my experiences or whatever. In regards to students particularly, some recommendations that I always have is, while you're experienced at OSU, experience it to your fullest. Yes, you need to focus on your grades, because if you don't, then you can't be here to experience the rest. But within that, do an internship. And some people are like, oh, I don't need that, or that's just work, or that's nerdy. Do it, because you learn so much from yourself in regards to, like, because of that internship. And preferably a paid one, but if you can't get a paid one, then it's okay. And the other thing is study abroad. And the same thing applies there, is you learn so much from yourself when you study abroad. Those two things is, you learn what you're capable of, how far you're willing to go, how hard you're willing to work, how vulnerable you are, putting yourself into situations where you don't know your new coworkers, or you don't know that different country, or maybe it doesn't have to be a country. It could be just national study abroad, but you're in a brand new situation, so you learn so much from yourself, and it goes back to growth. Those experiences let you grow so much, because now you learn, let's say, I need to balance my budget because this is only the only cash I have, or I need to figure out how to manage my new environment, not only by the culture, but how do I navigate? Like, do I use public transportation? Do I walk? That's another thing that's really fascinating. I remember OSU is really small. It's a really big university, but the Stillwater is very small. So I remember where I came from, you have to drive everywhere because it's so wide. And so here, I sometimes walk from my house to campus because I live pretty close by. Or I walk to like different places, or I'll take a bike ride or whatever. And people are like, why are you riding a bike? Why? It's so foreign to them because we're so used to places where you drive. But then again, you miss the exploring part of it being in a small community. So I think in regards to the advice that I have for people is be open to explore different things, different opportunities. And it doesn't have to be just with your culture. I love my culture, and you kind of need it to be yourself and to feel yourself. But don't be limited to that. explore different cultures, go to different events that are not just the Latin night. Go to, I don't know, African night and see how similar or different you are to those cultures. Because we do have similarities and differences with everybody, but looking and observing those things are what makes us, I think, appreciate who we are as a person. So I think that would be my advice.
So is there anything that I haven't asked you, something that you want to talk about or something you want to say for the interview?
Well, I thought you kind of hit on it a little bit when you were asking about, I guess, my, over time, my process in regards to the growth I've seen for the culture. But another thing is that when I got here, I learned so much about our culture here at OSU and how, unfortunately, we weren't able to be identified before. So I find that fascinating. I think, I talked about it with Dr. Cida Chase. She's a emerita Spanish professor or foreign language professor. And I think I spoke about it with you at one point in time as well, that, it could be good or bad that sometimes Hispanics can live a very inconspicuous life. And it's good or bad because sometimes you're treated good for it, and sometimes, you are treated bad. Like, you don't get to be yourself because of it. But within OSU, it's easy to identify, the first African American to graduate, or the first Native American because they had tribal cards. But in regards to finding our heritage within OSU, we don't know. I don't think we found out yet who the first Hispanic was. Not that it necessarily matters, like, when, but we do like role models. We do look up to people. We do look like, oh my goodness, they did this, awesome work or whatever. And so it's interesting, I think, throughout my time at OSU that I find that we can blend in really well, and that's a good thing. But it's also a bad thing because we lose ourselves. So in regards to our culture, I think it's very fascinating how OSU is now trying to, I think between all of us, and once again, I think it goes to the pride that I think in the U.S. it's easier to be prideful of being, Hispanic and Latino. So we look for those things now within our OSU community, but it's being hard for us to find those records, to find... I was looking over as an advisor to the Hispanic Student Association and advisor to the Latin American Student Association. It was amazing to see that they've been here longer than I've been born. LASA was established in 1976, I think, and HSA in 1978. Both of them are older than I am. That says a lot. And I know that there wasn't that many students then, but for them to fight for it, that means a lot. And so to find those, and the only reason I know about that is because I found it in the Constitution, and thank goodness it says the year. If not, I wouldn't have known. But, I remember talking to some students, and once again, it goes back to the pride that we talk about. That's awesome. That's awesome to see that there was other Hispanics here, and that we're probably fighting more than we were for their education. Because there were probably a lot more barriers for them back then than there is for us. So it is a privilege for us to be here, but it's amazing that we look for those records or things to kind of be like, be inspired by those that came before us, and it's been harder to find here at OSU. But I'm sure that we'll get to them. I'm sure that we'll find them, and we're getting there, I think, and you guys are doing an awesome job about it. But that's one of the things that I did want to add, that OSU has an amazing, I'm sure, and it's an amazing... history and rich history of Hispanic and Latino students or professors that have made a difference here on campus, but it's just now being found. And so I think it's awesome.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.